This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, I already knew going into this weekend that I wasn't going to have a whole lot of time to prep for this one. Saturday was one of those marathon days. I think that might be a record for me, too. Waking up at 6 o'clock and going pretty much all the way till a quarter after 11 p.m. It was a long day, but I made it. Problem is that it completely took away from my ability to watch anything in preparation for the Friday podcast. So I may as well spoil it now. You guessed it. No Friday show this week. There's a part of me that's thinking the same might be true for the following week, but I'm still trying to iron out details there. Part of me was considering just doing away with a Monday show entirely as well. But I watched Raw on Friday night and said, yeah, the show was at least interesting enough to warrant a full review. If the show was outright pointless like that one show we reviewed a couple weeks ago, I probably would have said scrap it. But I'm here doing this all on Sunday afternoon. So I'm going to knock out the recording session, get the editing done, and hopefully still have enough time to actually relax a little bit later tonight. I did not take my mid-afternoon nap like I typically do on Sundays, which is fine. You know, I talked about it a couple weeks ago. I've been trying this new creatine powder, and in addition to helping me out at the gym, it's also helping this midday fatigue, which is something I was hoping for, because I really don't like taking naps if I can avoid it. I only have time to do it on the weekends anyway, but sometimes I just need to rest my eyes for about 15 to 20 minutes. Today's not going to be one of those days. I want to thank everybody for coming back to check out the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling podcast no one knows but everyone needs. We're here on Mondays and Fridays to bring you retro wrestling coverage. It has been a year of multiple inconsistencies with actually making this a true retro timeline. But that's what you get with busy scheduling and, well, not doing full-time podcasting. So what do you say we get into things? It's time to dive into Retro Raw. So normally I don't spend a great deal of time going over show recaps or things that happen on previous episodes. But since we didn't review the show last week, that was the one after the pay-per-view, figured since they bothered to do a 3-minute recap package to show all the crap that went down, may as well do it a service and talk about the big angle that took place the other week. Or angles plural, because there was quite a bit that happened. And this is all centering around the Bret Austin feud. It was funny how they went as far as to timestamp when everything took place throughout the show, basically starting at 8 p.m. and working its way well into the top of hour 2. It began with Austin calling out Bret for a street fight, which they documented took place at 8:03 p.m. But the actual street fight didn't happen until like a half hour later when Bret finally confronted Austin in the ring. And that whole brawl led to Austin Pillmanizing Bret's leg with a folding chair. Same way he injured Bret's leg at the pay-per-view because they were working that story previously. And so a little later on, when they were trying to cart Bret off to the local medical facility, they shot the ambulance angle where Austin's sitting in the driver's seat waiting to jump Bret while they're tying him up to the gurney. And let me just say, that particular spot was probably funny at the time, considering we hadn't really seen anything like that before. That wasn't until they ran that shit back like 1,500 times over the course of the next several years. There's an iconic ambulance angle that took place way later on in the Attitude Era. I cannot remember who was all involved. I think it was Vince, Austin, Hunter, and maybe Taker or Kurt Angle was there too. No, actually, no, it was Taker. Because there's the iconic shot where Austin's laying on the gurney and the camera shoots through the back window of the ambulance right as Taker peers around the driver's side and yells, "Hello, boys." There's also the infamous "Where to, Stephanie" moment. But that doesn't take place in an ambulance, I don't think. I'm already getting way sidetracked here, and we're not even fucking 5 minutes into this fiasco. But fast forward later in the program, there's a segment where Owen and Bulldog come out to try to beat Austin up. But then Shawn Michaels runs out with a chair and decks the heels. Of course, Owen got the unprotected chair shot to the head. That's one for the night, if you're keeping track of headshots. And the final big moment that took place was Brian Pillman making his TV return, so he could deck Austin in the back with a chair. And that was where they left people hanging before the opening chyron. It was a lot of stuff, but I've said it before, I really enjoyed these opening packages where they explain things that happened the previous week. You know, they show the clips, they go over the importance of all the angles and segments. Yes, there's a lot of dramatic effect being put into the production of it. But that was the WWF's play. Vince loved the over-theatrical presentation of everything. Vince McMahon, that is. Yeah, Russo was into a lot of that stuff too. That's why he never proclaimed to be a booker. He was always a TV writer, because it was the episodic nature of how all the shows were put together. That was Russo's big thing. Not saying there was anything wrong with that. Although it did start to get a little ridiculous later on with all the Crash TV bullshit. But getting back to this week's show, we opened with Brian Pillman coming out for a promo. And this was unique in the sense that, I mean, unless I'm misremembering something, I'm pretty sure this was one of the first WWF-style promo segments where a guy just came out to talk without an interviewer or any kind of moderator standing in the ring. It was just Pillman on his own with a live mic talking in the ring. Which, I mean, I know that's not unique to today's product. That's how every promo is done now, it seems like. It's kind of a double-edged sword in that capacity. Like, they found a concept that worked for the time and decided to make it status quo for all future generations of talent. I still personally like the interview style of promos where someone with authority can actually call the shots and control what's being said. I've never been a fan of the WWE thing where guys can arbitrarily come out on a whim, grab a live mic, and just talk without somebody regulating what's being said. I know it's an old school mentality, but it's what I grew up on. So it's hard for me to see it any other way. I'm not going to sift through all the verbiage with a fine-tooth comb. He talked about being a religious man and how he wanted everybody to gather with him in prayer as he prayed for a speedy recovery for Bret Hart, the total annihilation of Stone Cold Steve Austin, and that Bret come back to be recognized as the pinnacle of the WWF. It was one of those deals where only a batshit lunatic like Brian Pillman could make something like that work. If anybody else on the roster tried to come out to do that exact same style promo, it would have bombed like fucking Hiroshima. But eventually Austin showed up on the big screen and threatened to beat Pillman's ass, which led to Pillman saying, "An eye for an eye, and to turn the other cheek," wherein he proceeded to turn to the big screen and stick his ass out toward Austin. And as he continued to jut his anal orifice toward the rampway, Austin started to make his way down toward the ring. But then the rest of Team Canada met him halfway and ran Austin off through the crowd. And this is where the segment got a little too clownish for me personally. In hindsight, I can respect their attempts at trying to be creative, but it was a little too silly. So Austin essentially pisses off through the crowd as Pillman tries to continue leading Owen and Davey through the rest of his prayer session. And it's supposed to be one of those hokey things where they're down on their knees bowing toward the ring mat, so they're not supposed to see as they show Austin on the big screen breaking into an empty locker room and grabbing a gimmick. I think they said it was an axe handle. Yeah, not an actual axe. Just the handle part. And so he makes a beeline back toward the ring with the handle to run all the heels off. And there were two elements that made it somewhat worthwhile for me. One was the nice touch where, as they show Austin grabbing the axe handle from the locker room, they cut back to the ring to show Owen looking over his shoulder at the monitor. But it was like perfect timing because right as he turns to look at it, they cut the feed. So he doesn't actually see Austin. And the other was Pillman pretending to crotch himself on the guardrail to make it look like Austin was going to get him. But then he still managed to get away at the last sec. I mean, that's just an example of great comedic timing. There was no way that was scripted to happen. Russo's not that creative. You know, again, they had an idea here. It wasn't completely ridiculous. There were some questionable things that happened along the way, but overall it did not insult my intelligence. But trying to look at the bigger picture, what did they establish here? Well, they established that Pillman is officially part of Team Canada. And it's one of the few times we're actually going to see Pillman physically active in the WWF before he passes away later on in the year. I don't remember much of anything Pillman did in terms of matches. I think he was mostly relegated to six-man tags here and there, but it was never anything huge. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, and this is a show-wide problem. Maybe it was different for people watching live at the time, so it was probably a network thing, but the audio sucked for this show. They were trying to filter out a lot of the background crowd noise, especially during promo segments, but all it did was make the promo sound like they were being delivered in a fucking phone booth. I hated that. It sounded like the way iMovie tries to cancel out background noise. But in result, it makes the main audio sound super tinny and I don't know. Kind of like if I talked into an empty coffee can. It was horrible. So we came back from break with Pillman in the locker room doing more praying. By the way, they showed multiple segments throughout the night of Pillman in the back praying. He was in the exact same spot every time. He literally just sat in a stationary location in the locker room for about 2 hours. In deep thought. What a gig. And then from there we went to the ring for Flash Funk versus Rockabilly. All of a sudden I was quickly reminded as to why the WWF was getting smoked in the fucking ratings. This match, just everything about his existence. So Billy spent about 3 minutes getting boring heat on Funk. He also did a bunch of comically awful gyrating. Calling it dancing would be a disservice to dancers. And of course, you have to remember, the gimmick with Rockabilly, he sucks. Therefore, he's incapable of winning a match to save his life. So Flash Funk, who I honestly cannot remember the last time actually won a match, beat Billy Gunn with a flash roll-up after Billy bumped the Honky Tonk Man off the apron. But of course, the heels had to get their heat back. So Billy pulled a page out of the Jeff Jarrett playbook and broke his guitar over Funk's head. And the trope of 10,000 guitars broken, 0 dimes drawn tale continues. What a complete waste of 5 minutes of TV time. And then we circle back to the Team Canada material. Team Canada, Hart Foundation, whatever you want to call them. I still call them Team Canada. We had Vince in the ring talking about Bret's recent knee surgery. They were very meticulous to show footage of this alleged knee surgery taking place, but they never actually showed Bret. It was CAT scan footage for the record. It wasn't them physically showing the doctors working on a human leg. I know for all the medical phobic people out there, probably a little too graphic for you. But of course, he's selling all this by rolling around in a wheelchair, which is perfect heel work. And so he comes out to the stage and starts making really obscure references to lions and hyenas and other wild animals of the jungle. Basically implying that Austin tried to cripple him. But Bret's a fighter, like a lion. So he was only wounded temporarily. And he called all the fans hyenas. So they're all a disgrace and how they're nothing like the Canadian fans. The ones that actually see and respect Bret like the hero he is. He said the American fans are sick and depraved. To which they all popped. That was funny. And while he was putting over how he's the best there is, was, and ever will be, he vowed that Stone Cold would wind up in the same ambulance that brought Bret to the building tonight. This was right around the time where I started to gain a little bit of an appreciation for Bret. I still would not have classified myself as a fan of his, but the heel work he did in 97, I mean, it was easily the best stuff I had ever seen from him up to that point. And this is where he was really starting to accentuate the pro-Canada, anti-America shtick, talking about how the American fans are degenerates and inbred scumbags, how they never appreciated Bret like the Canadian market does. I mean, in terms of Bret on the mic, it was by far the best promo work he ever did. So this is great. If I really wanted to be capricious, I could try and poke logic gaps in the fact that Bret came out to do this 3-minute promo at the top of the ramp. Meanwhile, Austin was nowhere to be seen. Even though we literally saw him 20 minutes earlier trying to run down the entire heel stable. I mean, he had plenty of time to come out and beat these guys up. What was he doing? Taking a leak? In fact, if I remember right, didn't they show him in the next segment walking around the back somewhere in the parking garage or something? As if it was really that hard to figure out where the hell these guys were. And so that took us to the Road Warriors versus Furnas and LaFawn. Right before the match, they aired a pre-tape where Jim Ross tried to ask Furnas and LaFawn why they weren't connecting with the WWF crowd. They couldn't figure it out. For the record, the answer was they were a very technically solid team, but they were also boring as fuck to watch and had the personality of rotting tree bark. Great in-ring technicians, but very sleep-inducing to watch at times. That's why they never got over. I mean, we've covered that story before. Wrong place, wrong time kind of situation. The match was what it was. The Legion of Doom won after Hawk came off the top and hit Furnas with a clothesline. I'm pretty sure LaFawn was technically the legal partner at the time, but fuck it, who cares? The bigger story coming out of this, however, was what they did not air here. It was what aired on the previous Shotgun Saturday night. And I've been alluding to this one for a while. It's unfortunately not a heartwarming story. In fact, it's kind of depressing. So there was a match with the Legion of Doom versus the Godwins. And during that match, Animal and Hawk tried to give Henry Godwin the Doomsday. And when Henry tried to do the flip bump off of Hawk's shoulders, he came down and landed right on the back of his head. Ended up legitimately breaking his neck as a result. They only showed it one time in passing. Didn't really draw a whole lot of attention to it outside a brief clip. I personally have never seen that match in full. Frankly, I have no interest in doing so. It's unfortunate, obviously. You all know I'm no fan of the hog farmer gimmick. And at some point, that gimmick was going to have to go away. I'm not saying this is the best case scenario for that to happen. It's kind of a similar way to what happened to Draws a few years later. Just one of those unexpected oh shit moments that tragically ended a guy's career cold turkey. I don't remember if Henry Godwin had to retire immediately after that neck surgery. If I'm correct, I think he ended up wrestling again shortly before he re-injured his neck and had to retire for real. But in terms of a stable, active wrestling career after that point, that was pretty much the end of his full-time career. If he did anything regularly between now and the end of his contract, I certainly don't remember anything. I don't encourage people to go watch that match. It's not something you really need to go out of your way to see. But it does kind of reflect on the conversations I've had about how the way the business has evolved over time. Like all these guys doing this incredibly unnecessary, high-risk, dangerous shit just to pop crowds and get themselves over because that's how they've been educated to think is the right way to do things. And you watch footage like Henry Godwin breaking his neck on a random shotgun Saturday night and think, it could all end in an instant. Nobody today has that school of thought, it seems like. Or if they do, they don't care, which is even worse. Anyway, moving on with things. We had footage of the Headbangers crashing Sonny's bedroom skit on Shotgun Saturday night. We had Ahmed doing a completely incomprehensible promo about something pertaining to the nation. He said he was a real thug. That's about all I got out of it. His voice also cracked like 5 times during his rant. We also had the Hart Foundation talking strategy about something in the back, but we didn't hear the audio. It did, however, lead directly into Owen Hart's match with Rocky Miavia for the Intercontinental title. And I can't remember when I brought this up. I know it was recently. I was talking about Owen's match with Austin at SummerSlam 97 and how, if I recall, I believe that was a title match. An IC title match. But for the life of me, I couldn't remember when or how Owen won the belt from Rocky. Well, now we figured it out. He won it in a complete throwaway title match on Raw that went unannounced and unadvertised. All that work they put into getting over Rocky and trying to establish him with that never say die attitude. The young kid that always seems to manage to find a way to get the job done and pull out the miracle win of a lifetime. Now they just beat him flat here and took the belt off of him with no fanfare. But at least Owen dedicated this match to his loving brother Bret. That is such an Owen Hart thing to say. And I love him for it. So when you remove the absolutely hideous audio quality for this thing, the match itself was pretty good. Probably the best Rocky Miavia match in the WWF to date. Of course, it comes at the expense of him losing the belt. Owen spent the bulk of the heat working over Rocky's knee. One could say he was kicking his leg out of his leg. Had to. I love here when they would pan up to Bret and Davey watching at the top of the ramp, and Davey's up there throwing air punches and just being the best cheerleader for Owen. Meanwhile, Bret's there just being very stoic. Like, to think they went through 8 months of teasing a breakup between Owen and Davey. Then you watch them when they're on the same page again, and you're like, God, these guys are so fucking great together. Why the hell did they ever think about making these guys feud? It was interesting seeing Rocky use the rock bottom as just another move in this match. They didn't even draw attention to it on commentary. Just totally blew it off. How things can change in a moment's notice. And so, well, here's what they do for a finish. Rocky gives Owen a back suplex from the top for a near fall. He then goes to try to give Owen a vertical suplex, which Owen turns into a grapevine pin. and he beats Rocky 1, 2, 3 to win the title. No real build to it either. Just Owen countered a hold and pinned the babyface clean as a sheet. Certainly not the way I was expecting the match to end. But indeed, that is what they did. And of course, the heels are at the top of the ramp celebrating like Owen just won the fucking main event at WrestleMania, which is what made the whole thing so epic. Like, Owen goes up there and immediately gives the belt to Bret as they continue their victory lap celebration, putting over all the gold they've accumulated. Now, that's something I completely forgot about until I saw them with the tag belt and the European title. First, I was like, oh yeah, that's right, Davey Boy's the European champion. Remember when I kept referencing how meaningless that championship became after like 2 months of them introducing it? Case in point, it is now a prop. But like the visual with all of Team Canada celebrating with the belts as Bret's getting carted around in his wheelchair, just awesome heel work. And for what it's worth, I know it's a common agreement that Rocky Miavia had go-away heat with a lot of people by this point. You know, taking the belt off of him here was probably best case scenario. The experiment was not working. They knew it. The crowd for sure knew it. I think deep down Dwayne knew it wasn't getting over. Sometimes you got to make those hard judgment calls. And they probably weren't planning to have Rocky drop the strap so soon. But you think about it too, like, what was his title reign actually accomplishing? Aside from getting the fans to hate him even more because they were so fed up with the gimmick. No, this is definitely the right move. And it got more heat on the Hart Foundation as a result, so win-win all around. Good stuff. And so, well, guess what we circled back to yet again? More Stone Cold. This show was quite literally Team Canada versus Stone Cold Steve Austin plus everything else that didn't matter a lick. By the way, yes, he wrestled later on in the main event for this show, but I think it's worth mentioning because we have not brought his name up yet. Do you guys know who the current WWF champion is at this moment? Because if you had no idea prior, and your only frame of reference was this particular show, you would be completely out to lunch. It's The Undertaker, in case you were curious. You know, the guy that beat Sid in the main event of WrestleMania 13. The guy that got his face burned on TV a month ago. Yeah, that guy. He is still allegedly the number one guy in the company at the moment. Never would know that based on what we've seen on the show thus far. The WWF champion got maybe 10 minutes of airtime this week. But Stone Cold, Bret Hart, and the rest of the peanut gallery, they got a total combined of like 50. So Austin was back in the ring for this promo. This time he came out through the crowd with a wheelchair and challenged Bret to a legit handicap match. He said he'd be willing to meet Bret wheel to wheel. That was after he stomped a mud hole in his ass and walked it dry. And so, as Austin is casually talking about wanting to cripple Bret and send him away in an ambulance, He also passively mentioned the fact that he's wrestling The Undertaker for the WWF Championship at the Next In Your House. What? Yeah, sure, just nonchalantly throw that little detail out there. Oh, by the way, I'm next in line for a title shot. Seems a little important to mention. So Bret showed up on the Jumbotron for about 10 seconds, told Austin that he was going to send him away in the ambulance. And that was basically it. I'm convinced that the sole purpose for this segment was so Austin could let everybody know what the next title match is for the pay-per-view. It was one big advertisement for the May In Your House. Buy those tickets now. Did they bother to explain how Austin got this title match? Not to my knowledge. He was just handed the number one contender spot. I mean, sure, he beat Bret at the last pay-per-view by DQ, but there was literally no setup for it beyond, hey, Austin's wrestling Taker for the WWF title in May because we need a challenger of the month. And Austin fits the bill, or foots the bill, whatever the old saying is. From there, we got to see the Kuwait footage of Vader assaulting the morning talk show host. Assaulting being a very liberal way to describe it. He was more so trying to be in character, but since they didn't bother to smarten up the guy beforehand, led to a whole bunch of BS with Vader getting legitimately detained and fined. I forget it was. He spent like 2 weeks in Kuwait, right? It was a huge mess. A funny mess. But it got him in a lot of trouble. And the thing I find so humorous about the whole story, at the same time people probably remember the Vader situation in Kuwait, what they don't remember probably is the fact that they're also doing a storyline with him and Ken Shamrock where they're calling each other out for these shoot-style fights. All the while, they seem to be more focused on trying to hype up Ken Shamrock, calling out Mike Tyson. It's like Vader was a designated backup plan, knowing they weren't going to get Tyson to actually agree to work with Shamrock in a match. Whether it was worked or not. They also aired a Shamrock video package where I believe he said the word challenge 47 times in the course of a minute. It was supposed to be one of those multi-layered highlight packages where they talk about various aspects of his personal life and fighting career. It was fine. Didn't quite hit the mark, if you know what I mean. And again, none of this had anything to do with building up an issue between him and Vader. But they did name drop Mike Tyson a bunch. It's like, tell me you wanted to program that match for SummerSlam 97 without deliberately saying such. Could you have imagined them actually doing Mike Tyson versus Ken Shamrock at SummerSlam? My God. Now that would have been quite the spectacle. For the record, I have no idea if that was ever in the works. I never recall hearing rumors or stories about a potential Shamrock-Tyson match at a Big Four. But if you told me it was a possibility, or that Vince was trying to work out something to make it happen. I wouldn't doubt it. And it kind of makes sense considering where they went with things for WrestleMania 14 next year. Getting back to the subject of Vader real quick. He got a squash win over Jesse James. Pinned him in one with a Vader bomb in about 2 minutes. JR spent the bulk of commentary trying to call out Vader's stupidity for what happened in Kuwait, which telegraphed where things were going after the match. So we got in there and started asking Vader a bunch of leading questions about what went down overseas, whether or not he regretted embarrassing not just himself, but the WWF as a whole. And of course, Vader responded by saying that he doesn't apologize to anybody over what happened. And in fact, with JR's bogus line of questioning, he was thinking about finishing what he started in Kuwait. And as he kept intimidating JR and getting physical with him in the corner, that was Shamrock's cue to hit the ring and give Vader the belly-to-belly before he took off running. It was one of those things where listening to JR do this interview, with the way he kept prodding Vader with these questions, I honestly don't blame Vader for getting bent out of shape. I mean, he was all but calling Vader a moron for what he did. And he was very rational with his answer at first. He was like, apologize. Why? I went overseas to do a job, and I did it well. I made sure to protect the business and make my profession look legit. Where's the problem? And all the while, JR's continuing to poke the bear by asking him dumb shit like, well, don't you think you overreacted? Don't you think you took things a bit too far? As a matter of fact, no, Jim. I don't think he did. I think Vader handled himself exactly the way the boys would have done it back in the day. Some hack job wants to try to expose the business in the public sphere to make himself look good. Hey, you need to set an example and rattle that fucker up a bit. Make sure he never questions the legitimacy of the business ever again. Bearing in mind that Vader is supposed to be the heel, and Jim Ross is supposed to be the, I guess you would say, babyface interviewer, the straight shooter, JR is the one that came out looking like a jackass. I don't know. Whatever. The moral to the story is fuck the Kuwait government. Actually, no, just fuck everything about Kuwait. Speaking of things I said fuck to, I said fuck it with this Triple H Goldust match. They played Ring Around the Rosie with this godforsaken program for far too long. Far beyond my breaking point, I'll tell you that much. I was over this thing well before they even got to their match at WrestleMania 13. Much less continuing the feud after the fact. So I got up to take a piss while this was going on in the other room. You will be unsurprised to hear that Hunter did not, in fact, lose clean to Goldust. Even in their 817th encounter in the last 5 months alone, still couldn't have Hunter actually do a job to the babyface in this fucking interminable program. Instead, they had Hunter lose by countout after the babyfaces threw powder in Chyna's eyes. When Hunter went down to try to console her, Chyna grabbed Hunter by the throat and lifted him up in the air to choke him. Because, you know, it was too hard for her to differentiate Hunter's voice from Goldust. That's why she goozled Hunter, not knowing who it was. Or something to that effect. Never mind that should have been automatic grounds for a disqualification anyway. But they didn't even let that simmer for 30 seconds before the Undertaker's gong went off. And they dimmed the house lights so he could do the big promo on the big screen, which was also rushed and thrown together in about a minute. He talked about lighting Paul Bear's face on fire at the pay-per-view, told Austin that he better come focused at the May in your house, or he may rest in peace. At that point, it was the first time we actually saw The Undertaker on camera all night. Great. Only took him until the final 15 minutes of the program to actually recognize who their world champion was. And so we got The Undertaker versus the British Bulldog in the TV main event. It did not occur to me until Bulldog's pre-match promo, where he said he was dedicating this match to Bret. He vowed that he would win the WWF title for him tonight. That is when the light bulb went off and I realized, oh, this is a championship match, you say? Glad they bothered to mention that prior. The irony here is that had Davey beaten Taker to win the belt, not saying this was ever going to be a consideration, but had they actually done that, the Hart Foundation would have had possession of every major WWF championship at that point, which is weird to think about. Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when the WWF only had 4 recognized sets of titles, as opposed to whatever they have now, which is like goddamn 57, spread across like 4 or 5 different brands, and half of them are girls' belts. So bearing in mind that they only had about 8 minutes to work with, they had about as good of a match as you can have in that allotted amount of time. And after Davey promised that he would win the WWF title for Bret moments prior, you will never guess what they booked for a finish. DQ run-in by Owen Hart. Who didn't see that one coming, show of hands? And so here's everything that transpired from that point through the end of the show, in order of events. I wrote this all down. I made very sure that I didn't miss anything. DQ run-in by Owen. Heels attack The Undertaker. Steve Austin runs down to even the odds. Austin and Taker chase Owen and Bulldog through the crowd. Austin hijacks the WWF title and poses with it. Taker confronts him. Austin stuns Taker. Austin taunts Taker but gets goozled because Austin fails to understand the Undertaker taunting logic. You don't try and strike a pose over Taker while he's in the zombie position. It never ends well. Taker chokeslams Austin. Austin proceeds to stalk Bret at the top of the ramp. Jim Neidhart returns to lay out Austin. Bret hits Austin with a crutch and knocks him off the stage. Stretcher job to Austin to close out the rest of the show. Did you get all that? Because I had to pause and carefully make sure that I documented all of that in real time. Because that was a lot of shit to keep track of. Oh yes, and how could I forget the fact that Neidhart is now back, seemingly from out of the blue. See, the funny part is that out of all that rigmarole of horseshit, the Neidhart thing was probably like third most important. Now, this is where Russo booking surpasses the art of stupidity and becomes purely laughable. He's like, hey, what do you think about reintroducing Jim Neidhart? Yeah, that's great, bro. But what we really need to have is Bret throw Austin off the stage. Lo and behold, guess who was instantly forgotten about the moment Austin got dumped off the stage? We'll see. Does Jim Neidhart come back to wrestle? Or was he just like the bodyguard player? Lord knows I remember. What do you say about this show? It was definitely one of those episodic-driven television programs. I know I keep name-dropping him. Whatever you want to say about the guy, this is Russo Forte booking. These show-long stories where you basically see the same cast of characters at least a dozen times in a 2-hour window. Then you sprinkle in some occasional undercard stuff just to fill time. And they quite literally could have made this entire 2 hours the Steve Austin Hart Foundation show, and you really weren't missing much of anything else. These guys were all over the damn place. But you know what? I didn't hate it. Yeah, there was still a lot of dumb shit that happened on this program, but I found myself enjoying this one. Some of it for my own personal amusement. But they had a theme going this week, and by God, they were sticking to it. They promised us that someone was getting carted off in an ambulance. And with the amount of false advertising we've seen from this company in the last how many years doing these retro reviews, at least they delivered on a promise. So good on them. I will give this show a solid thumbs up for effort. We'll see if the trend continues next week. But I'm going to get out of here and get the editing going on this thing. Thanks all for watching. And again, just to recap, there will not be a Friday show this week. I'm going to try to see if I can make something work for the following week. I might be able to. When I say following week, I mean the following Friday. Because I don't want to get in the habit of, going 2 or 3 weeks without doing a Friday show. Otherwise, what's the point of even doing the Friday shows anymore? I really am trying, people. It's just one of those things where hectic scheduling. No other way to put it. But anyway, thanks all, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care, and peace out.